Rwanda Statistical Yearbook 2024. Trends in household indicators that expose Kagame's visionary illusions. Written by Gabriel Ndayishimiye. Introduction. Rwanda's development narrative, often heralded as a visionary model of transformation, reflects a framework of development as spectacle, an economic strategy that prioritizes global admiration over substantive reforms. By leveraging a curated image of progress, Kagame's administration attracts foreign aid and investment while concealing significant structural deficiencies. The 2024 Rwanda Statistical Yearbook lays bare these contradictions, with evidence of declining education access, stagnant infrastructure, and pervasive inequalities. This critique situates Rwanda's approach within the broader concept of performative development, where statistical gains and infrastructure projects serve to mask systemic vulnerabilities and unmet needs, ultimately undermining equitable economic progress. 1. Demography, a shrinking household without sustained support. Average household size. The decline in average household size from 5 people in 2005 and 2006 to 4 people in 2022 might initially seem like a benign indicator of urbanization and modernization. Yet, in Kagame's Rwanda, it reflects a far grimmer reality: a systematic erosion of traditional familial support structures without the compensatory development of robust social safety nets. This trend, often heralded as progress, starkly exposes how vulnerable populations, children and the elderly in particular, are abandoned to the margins. With institutional care conspicuously absent, these groups bear the brunt of a government more focused on cosmetic metrics than the substantive welfare of its people. Mean Dependency Ratio. The mean dependency ratio's decline from 87 in 2005 and 2006 to 78 in 2019 and 2020 is paraded as evidence of a demographic dividend, with more working-age individuals poised to drive economic growth. Yet, the irony is glaring. In Kagame's Rwanda, this so-called advantage is little more than a facade. The stagnating economy offers few non-farm wage opportunities, especially in rural areas, leaving the working-age population trapped in economic limbo. This demographic dividend is nothing but a hollow promise, as the government fails to integrate this labor force into meaningful economic activities. Instead, the declining dependency ratio becomes a statistical distraction, masking the regime's inability or unwillingness to translate population shifts into tangible benefits for its people. 2. Education. The percentage of individuals aged 6 and above who had ever attended school plummeted from 89% in 2019 and 2020 to 78% since 2022. This catastrophic drop shatters Kagame's narrative of progress in education. It reveals not just neglect, but an active disinterest in equipping Rwanda's youth with the most basic tools for development. While the regime postures as a forward-thinking administration, these numbers expose a grim reality: a leader indifferent to the intellectual impoverishment of his people, as long as global accolades remain intact. Tertiary education, individuals between 16 to 30 years. Tertiary enrollment has stagnated at a meager 3% since 2022, a figure that makes a mockery of Kagame's rhetoric about building a knowledge-driven, tech-oriented economy. For over a decade, progress has barely crept forward from 1.7%, 2010 and 2011. This glaring gap between lofty aspirations and ground-level stagnation paints a clear picture of a regime far more committed to appearances than to substantive educational reform. Kagame's technological revolution is reduced to a hollow slogan when fewer than 1 in 30 young adults can access higher education. Computer literacy, individuals aged between 15 to 24 years. While computer literacy peaked at 15.2% in 2019 and 2020, the absence of updated data for 2022 speaks volumes. In a regime that champions its ambition of becoming Africa's tech hub, the silence around such critical metrics is deafening. The reality is stark. The so-called digital revolution is a mirage for the majority of Rwandans, with the slow pace of technological integration betraying a government more invested in crafting illusions than in equipping its youth to participate in a modern economy. Kagame's Rwanda is a stage where technology is celebrated as long as it serves the spectacle, not the people. Three, housing. The proportion of households living in planned settlements, umudugudu, surged from 17.6% in 2005 and 2006 to 65% by 2022. At first glance, this might appear as a triumph of Kagame's vision for orderly, planned communities. However, this narrative unravels upon closer inspection. These settlements often lack essential infrastructure, basic services, and economic opportunities, turning promises of modernization into hollow rhetoric. Families are uprooted under the banner of progress, only to find themselves in poorly planned areas that exacerbate their struggles. This celebrated statistic is less a reflection of meaningful development and more a calculated piece of propaganda, an illusion masking the government's failure to deliver substantive improvements to its citizens' lives. Improved roofing and flooring. The increase in households with metal roofs to 74% and cement flooring to 31% by 2022 is frequently touted as evidence of enhanced living standards. Yet beneath these numbers lies an uncomfortable truth. They highlight incremental, superficial gains rather than transformative change. The reliance on rudimentary materials underscores the persistent poverty gripping rural communities. While the data may suggest progress, it fails to address the underlying issues: lack of access to quality housing, stagnant incomes, and inadequate policies to uplift the rural poor. These improvements serve as window dressing for a regime more invested in optics than in addressing the structural inequities afflicting its people. Electricity access. While electricity access reportedly climbed to 61% in 2022, the decline in off-grid solar energy usage, from 15.4% in 2019 and 2020 to 14% in 2022, exposes glaring weaknesses in Rwanda's electrification strategy. For many rural communities, off-grid solutions are not a luxury, but a necessity, and their decline signals a troubling neglect. The focus on expanding grid access prioritizes urban areas, leaving rural households in the dark, literally and figuratively, with unreliable and unaffordable electricity. The drop in solar usage is a testament to maintenance failures, insufficient investment in renewable infrastructure, and a disregard for sustainable solutions in rural development. This misstep undermines the government's claims of progress and lays bare its disregard for long-term, equitable energy solutions. Four, energy use, a stalled transition to modern fuels. Firewood dependence. Despite years of rhetoric about modernization, firewood remains the primary energy source for 76.1% of households as of 2022, a stark indicator of Rwanda's stagnation in diversifying energy options. This enduring reliance exposes the regime's failure to make clean and affordable energy accessible to rural populations. The continued dependence on firewood not only entrenches energy poverty, but also exacerbates environmental degradation and health risks associated with traditional fuel use. Kagame's administration touts progress, but the reality leaves millions locked in a cycle of hardship, with no meaningful pathways to sustainable energy solutions. Charcoal use. Charcoal use persists at 17.3% in 2022, reflecting the government's inability to reduce urban reliance on this environmentally and economically unsustainable fuel. The lack of viable, affordable alternatives for urban households underscores a critical policy shortfall. Instead of addressing systemic barriers, such as the high cost of clean energy or inefficiencies in alternative energy supply chains, Kagame's administration continues to deliver hollow rhetoric about sustainability. This failure reveals a government more concerned with projecting an image of progress than tackling the structural issues that perpetuate charcoal dependency. Five, water and sanitation. Improved drinking water. Access to improved drinking water dropped significantly from 89.2% in 2019 and 2020 to 82% in 2022, a sharp and troubling decline that contradicts the regime's self-promotion of modernization. This regression lays bare Kagame's failure to prioritize essential public utilities. Rural populations, often the most vulnerable, are disproportionately affected, facing dire consequences for health, productivity, and overall well-being. The government's inability to maintain basic water infrastructure reveals a pattern of neglect, prioritizing symbolic milestones over practical, life-enhancing investments. This alarming backslide underscores the hollow nature of Rwanda's touted progress. Improved sanitation. The plummet in access to improved sanitation facilities, from 89.6% in 2019 and 2020 to 72% in 2022, is not just an infrastructure failure, but a full-blown public health crisis. This drastic decline reflects a breakdown in oversight and a lack of investment in critical infrastructure, with rural communities bearing the greatest burden. Poor sanitation exacerbates the spread of waterborne diseases and significantly reduces life expectancy, undercutting Rwanda's claims of health and human development. The steep decline is a damning indictment of Kagame's administration, exposing its prioritization of cosmetic achievements over substantive improvements that truly benefit the population. Six, technology and communication. Internet access. Internet penetration plummeted from 23.8% in 2019 and 2020 to a dismal 14% in 2022, exposing a glaring contradiction to Kagame's vision of transforming Rwanda into a tech-driven economy. This stark decline highlights systemic issues in affordability, infrastructure expansion, and policy execution, unraveling the government's narrative of prioritizing technological advancement. For rural communities, where connectivity could revolutionize education, healthcare, and business opportunities, the lack of access cements the digital divide. Instead of enabling widespread innovation, the government has cultivated an environment where technology remains a luxury for the privileged few, betraying the aspirations of an inclusive digital future. Mobile phone ownership. The rise in mobile phone ownership to 78% in 2022 may seem like progress, but it rings hollow when contrasted with the collapse in internet penetration. This disconnect underscores a profound policy failure, an inability to translate high mobile adoption into meaningful technological empowerment. Barriers such as exorbitant data costs, limited rural network coverage, and inadequate digital infrastructure prevent mobile phones from being transformative tools. Kagame's rhetoric of a digitally connected Rwanda stands exposed as performative, with the government prioritizing cosmetic gains over addressing the deeper structural challenges that keep the majority of Rwandans excluded from the digital revolution. Seven, health. Health insurance. Rwanda's health insurance coverage reportedly expanded to an impressive 97.3% in 2022, a statistic Kagame's regime often showcases as a hallmark of its commitment to health equity. However, this headline figure obscures deeper issues surrounding the quality and accessibility of care. Many insured individuals find themselves unable to access essential medications or specialized services due to an underfunded and overstretched health system. This raises serious questions about whether this near-universal coverage translates into improved health outcomes or merely serves as another example of surface-level progress designed to bolster the regime's image rather than address the real needs of the population. Access to health centers. While the average travel time to health centers decreased to 47.4 minutes in 2019 and 2020, this improvement disproportionately benefits urban areas. Rural communities, which make up the majority of the population, still contend with significant barriers, including inadequate infrastructure, understaffed facilities, and inconsistent services. Kagame's regime celebrates reductions in travel times as evidence of progress, but the data masks stark inequalities that leave rural populations underserved and vulnerable. These persistent disparities highlight the regime's failure to address systemic inequities in healthcare access, prioritizing optics over meaningful, equitable solutions for all Rwandans. Eight, economic activities. Non-farm wages. Non-farm wage employment remains stuck at a mere 22% as of 2019 to 2020, a glaring indictment of Kagame's economic policies. Despite grand proclamations of diversification and industrialization, the stagnation lays bare the regime's failure to foster meaningful job creation outside agriculture. This persistent plateau reflects a superficial approach to economic transformation, prioritizing PR-driven narratives over structural reforms necessary to expand labor market participation and drive sustainable growth. The result is an economy where opportunities for wage employment remain elusive for the majority. Independent small-scale farming, a declining lifeline. The proportion of independent small-scale farmers has plummeted from 71.3% in 2005 and 2006 to just 51% in 2019 and 2020, signaling a profound erosion of traditional rural livelihoods. This dramatic decline has left countless rural Rwandans in economic precarity, with little support to transition to alternative sectors. The absence of targeted policies to bolster smallholder farmers, combined with a lack of viable non-agricultural opportunities, has deepened unemployment and exacerbated economic inequality. Far from being a success story, This shift highlights the fragile underpinnings of Kagame's so-called development model, which sacrifices rural resilience for the illusion of progress. Nine. Financial inclusion, growth but limited impact. Bank account ownership. The rise in bank account ownership to 58.9% in 2019 and 2020 is frequently celebrated as a marker of Rwanda's financial inclusion progress. However, this statistic reveals glaring inequities beneath the surface. For vast rural populations, formal financial services remain inaccessible, forcing many to rely on insecure, informal savings methods that do little to promote financial empowerment. This urban-rural divide underscores the regime's consistent failure to address structural barriers to economic integration. Rather than indicating meaningful progress, the data exposes the superficial nature of Rwanda's financial inclusion policies, which prioritize headline figures over substantive reforms to ensure equitable access to financial systems. Kagame's focus on optics continues to leave rural economies marginalized and excluded. Recommendations. We demand Kagame's regime to stop hiding behind propaganda and establish independent oversight bodies to evaluate government programs with full transparency. Publish detailed, accessible reports on policy outcomes without delay, and create inclusive platforms for genuine public feedback. Acknowledge failures boldly and address them head-on with decisive corrective actions, no more suppressing criticism or avoiding responsibility. We demand Kagame's regime to halt the shameful regression in education, water, and sanitation access. Act now by building schools, improving water pipelines, and modernizing sanitation systems, especially in rural areas. Prioritize comprehensive teacher training and equitable resource distribution to eliminate the urban-rural divide. Secure sustainable funding and maintenance. No more excuses for neglecting these critical sectors. We demand Kagame's regime to stop ignoring underserved regions and implement inclusive strategies to uplift rural areas. Launch rural electrification programs, microfinance initiatives tailored to smallholder farmers, and invest heavily in local infrastructure. Draw from successful examples like Ethiopia's rural electrification and Bangladesh's microfinance models to fight rural poverty. Immediate action on agriculture, education, and healthcare is non-negotiable for addressing the needs of marginalized communities. Failure to act decisively on these fronts is unacceptable and a betrayal of the Rwandan people. Kagame's regime must abandon its obsession with optics and propaganda and start addressing the deep structural challenges facing the nation. Every delay exacerbates inequality, deepens rural neglect, and undermines the lives of millions. This is not just a call for reform, it is a demand for accountability, transparency, and the delivery of tangible, measurable progress for all Rwandans. Conclusion. Rwanda Statistical Yearbook 2024. Trends in Household expose Kagame's visionary illusions. The Rwanda Statistical Yearbook 2024 reveals a sobering truth behind Kagame's carefully constructed image of visionary leadership. Trends in household indicators expose a troubling pattern, a focus on superficial progress that prioritizes optics over meaningful change. Declining access to clean water, sanitation and education, stagnation in non-farm employment, and persistent barriers to financial inclusion highlight systemic failures that undercut the regime's lofty claims of modernization. In education, the gap between enrollment rates and actual learning outcomes further underscores the disconnect between policy and reality. A lack of investment in quality teaching, infrastructure, and equitable access has left many Rwandan children with limited prospects for upward mobility especially in rural areas. Beneath the facade of statistical success lies an alarming neglect of structural inequities that continue to marginalize the rural majority and hinder sustainable progress. The yearbook lays bare the hollowness of Kagame's promises, exposing how his so-called visionary governance often sacrifices substantive reform for headline-grabbing achievements. Real development demands more than illusions. It requires genuine investment in equitable, inclusive policies that uplift all Rwandans, not just a privileged few.